So if anything, we heard so far about three TKIs in the setting of third line, being regorafenib, and second is cabozantinib, and thirdly is ramucirumab. And quite fascinating that the evaluation that we heard from all of us is that Rego, there's this kind of conditional requirement of progression on the sorafenib that lead to a potential, positive outcome using regorafenib, and understandably, tolerance will come into play as well over here. And as we heard from Andrew, that yes, they might look very similar, very subtle differences, but they could probably make the difference, as we heard in regard to type 2 and what have we. Number two is cabozantinib. Interestingly, cabozantinib have shown its positive impact, and by the way, it happened in second line and even in third line. In other words, patients were required to get prior sorafenib, but they could have gotten probably another line of therapy, and still the outcome was positive. And thirdly, we heard about the ramucirumab that no doubt is or has shown an improvement in survival in specifically the patient with the high alpha-fetoprotein that's more than 400. How these gonna be kind of like used and applied, I think some guidances already are in place. Again, we go back to sorafenib followed by Rego, so it's kind of like they are really tied up together per se. But on the other hand, for the AFP also, if it's more than 400, then Rami could be a choice, pending, of course, the the FDA approval for that. So I would say that's gonna evolve as we go in regard to the ultimate choices of the use of those different TKIs. Interestingly, however, while we're busy with all those TKIs, and already we mentioned 5 of them, 2 in first line and 3 in second line, the kind of, the big story, or the other big story, I would say, came from the checkpoint inhibitors. And if anything, as we heard from the beginning from Rich, already 2 of them are already conditionally approved by the FDA and are available on the market. And it will be intriguing to hear a little bit more about those 2 before we dissect further the question of the checkpoint inhibitors. And I'll start with Katie. And of course, the data that we have been, or we heard most about in the beginning was that of nivolumab. So tell us first, what's nivolumab? Like, immunotherapy, then what? What is it?
So nivolumab is one of several drugs now in the family of programmed death 1 immune checkpoint inhibitors, or PD-1 inhibitors. And it was actually the second checkpoint inhibitor studied in HCC, the first being a CTLA-4 inhibitor called tremelimumab a while back in just hepatitis C in a very small cohort, which had intriguing results, but not enough to move forward at that time. So the nivolumab story begins with Checkmate 40, a single-arm, rather, I should say, a checkpoint inhibitor monotherapy study that started out as a phase 1/2 safety study to really test the safety of immune disinhibition with a checkpoint inhibitor. You asked, what is a checkpoint inhibitor? And I think that does bear repeating even to an oncology audience. A PD-1 inhibitor blocks an innate checks and balance on our own immune system, and it allows T cells to be activated by MHC complex bearing an antigen that they recognize in their environment rather than being shut down by an inhibitory signal. And so it blocks that inhibitory signal and lets our T cells recognize a potential foreign antigen of a tumor in this case. And so the first PD-1 checkpoint inhibitor is nivolumab, which was studied in Checkmate 40.
Fair enough, and this has definitely had a nice response. But if I were to understand, what really was most intriguing is not necessarily only the response rate, but the duration of response. And then we saw something relatively similar as outcome. And Andy, you can tell us about your data on pembrolizumab.
Yeah, so pembrolizumab is another PD-1 antibody. We actually test that drug, very similarly to, what the nivolumab experience in a population who actually advanced HCC and they actually fail sorafenib in a population with different etiology, Hep B, Hep C, uninfected. And in the whole cohort, of 104 patients, we observe, very solid 17% response rate. And also, as you correctly pointed out, that, very similar to nivolumab, our data also suggests if you respond, the duration of response tends to be very impressive. And we have patients actually staying on trial, for a prolonged period of time. So the safety profile is also, very much similar to what we anticipate for this class of drug. And I think, with that data, FDA also, approved this agent in the accelerated approval setting in the second line. So, all of a sudden, we have 2 checkpoint inhibitors that we can actually apply to our patients, which is actually fantastic news for our patients.